Alright, so today I want to talk about why I chose to get the Challenger over the Mustang and Camaro. So, there are several reasons why. The first reason is because back in 1970, my uncle bought a 1970 Challenger with a 383 V8. It was blue with white interior. I think it was B5 blue to be exact, with white interior. So I never saw the car personally. I only heard about it, and he loved the car. He eventually ended up selling it because the tranny went, and he didn't want to pay the repairs on the tranny, so he just sold the car and bought a new car. I don't know what he bought after that, but he sold it and moved on with it. But he loved the car. My father loved the car. For the longest time, right before I got my license, I was looking at a Mustang. This is back 2012 when I was 18 years old. I was looking to get a Mustang GT. I was calling all over. I was just obsessed with the Mustang. My other uncle, had a 1986 Cobra and a 1994 Cobra. So I was kind of leaning towards Mustang. Then probably around 2009, 2010, when the new Challenger came back out, my dad saw it and he just fell in love with it. He told me it reminded him of when my uncle had his 1970 Challenger and was driving around in it, and he just remembered getting pinned to the back seat because that car just had a lot of power, and it just brought back nice memories. And so it brought back something in his mind where he was like, Christian, why don't you look at the Challenger? Why are you just so starstruck for the Mustang? And so I was open-minded to it. I started looking at it. I started researching it. I noticed that it made less power than the Mustang, but I'm 18 years old. I mean, you want to go fast when you get a new car, when you get a fast car. You're a new driver. You want to have that experience, but that gets old. Driving fast gets old. And I realized that when I turned 18, I said to myself, I'm like, this is still a fast car, the Challenger. It competes with the Mustang. Even though it loses to the Mustang, it competes with the Mustang. And I said, what am I really about? I said, am I really about speed, or do I want reliability? Do I want looks? Do I want comfort? So I did some more research on the car. I started looking around. I went and test drove a 2012 Mustang GT, and that thing was fast. It was a little tight though. That's the only thing. It had a live rear axle on the back, so every time you hit a bump, it would bounce. It would jerk, and it would jerk to each side of the road. It wasn't as comfortable as the Challenger was. I didn't even bother looking at a Camaro because I've never really been a big fan of the Camaro. I've heard people put custom exhausts on them, and they don't sound right. I like something with a rumble, something that's gonna sound pretty good stock. So the Camaro, that was out. I sat in it. My buddy had one. The windows were so shrunk, and you sat so low. It was just it was a little bit of an uncomfortable ride, and it was hard to see out of. There was a lot of blind spots, and that was something that Chevy had a complaint of back in 2010 when they brought the refreshed Camaro out. So the Camaro was out. So at that point I was stuck between the Mustang and the Challenger, and I had been calling around, and I went and I like I said, I test drove the Mustang. It was very quick. I wanted to get a 6-speed manual, and I was kind of leaning towards that. And my dad was like, "All right, let's just go out. Let's go look at a Challenger." He was kind of for the Challenger. So I said, "All right, let's go." So I went and I looked, and I went to Brown's in Patchogue, out East Long Island, and I actually looked at the one that I'm currently driving. And it was sitting right in the showroom. I typed it up, and I had found it online before, and so I knew they had it in stock. And I originally wanted blue, but this was kind of like this had all the options that I was looking for, but the only thing, it was black. So the car, I remember, it had 36 miles on it, and I went and test drove it twice before I went and got it. So I put 8 miles on the car. I ended up coming home with it with about 44 miles on it, and it was funny because I didn't know that I was getting it. I went and I looked at it, and you know, I said to myself, I'm like, this may be the one. You know, I was back and forth between the Mustang and the Challenger, and I guess my dad was sick of me going back and forth, so you know, he surprised me with it. You know, I was in my house, and I walked out the door. My grandfather was trying to keep me in the house, and I walked out the door, and my dad pulled up in this, and I was like, I thought it was like a weird dream. You know, it scared me. I ran back inside the house, but yeah. So they ended up bringing it home, and they told me how much my payments were going to be. So I kind of, at that point, I was in it. You know, there was no there was no turning back. It was fine though, because my payments were relatively cheap, because I took it out as a lease, a 3-year lease. So my payments were about $289 a month for 3 years, with, I think it was 12,000 miles a year. But I knew at that point I wanted to buy the car. As soon as I sat in it, as soon as I drove, I began to love it. I always had that Mustang in the back of my mind though. But when I got this, you know, all those thoughts went away. I said, you know, this is the one. In my opinion, this is the best looking car out of the 3. It's the most retro, it's the most nostalgic. I like how it brings, like, it has the remnants of a 1970 Challenger. Even the inside door panel here, I look back at photos of the 1970 Challenger, and they're so alike. Dodge just did a great job with that. And you know, as far as driving goes, it's a very comfortable car. It's wide, it takes bumps nicely. This has independent rear suspension, opposed to Mustang that has the solid rear axle. So this takes bumps a little bit better. It's a little bit more of a heavier car. I think it weighs a little over 4,000 pounds. I think it's 4,082 to be exact. It's got 372 horsepower and 400 foot-pounds of torque, but I will say this is a very torquey car. Right around, I'd say, like the 3,500 RPM band is where the power kicks in, and it pins you back in your seat. The Mustang had a similar, you know, punch back in the seat, but it's lighter. It has more power, so that power to weight ratio gives it the advantage. But I wasn't a big fan. The only thing I didn't like about the Mustang was the rear end of the 2012 Mustangs. I wasn't really a big fan of those taillights. I thought the front was very, very aggressive. Ford did a great job with that when they came out with that. But yeah, the taillights, that was the only thing that I was kind of like, I was iffy about when it came to the Mustang. So I kind of have to thank my father for convincing me to get a Challenger, because I think I made the right choice. I'm happy with it. I haven't had really any complaints. The only thing that I had to replace that was covered under warranty was the alternator went about, I want to say 40,000 miles. You know, after 4 years, I had 40,000 miles on the car, and I heard this whining sound, and I did some research, and I found out, you know, I knew that it was the alternator. But I did research to make sure that it was the alternator, so I called Dodge up, and luckily the car was still in warranty, and they were able to replace that. But it was weird that, you know, the alternator would go after 4 years. But the other thing is, I had to replace on this car, well, I didn't have to replace, the dealership covered it, was my drive shaft bolt. As I was coming around a ramp, I guess I was coming around the ramp a little hard, didn't slow down enough. It actually sheared and broke in half. And so when I would get up to about 40, 50 miles an hour, the car would begin to vibrate like vigorously from the rear end. And I didn't know, I had no idea what it was. I thought maybe the alignment was off terribly or what. It almost felt like it had a flat tire. So I took it to my local Goodyear real quick to get an alignment done, and the guy actually found the bolt sticking out of the drive shaft. It's a unit where there's 3 bolts on each side. It's like a kit, and one of the bolts was sticking out, and the other part had, I guess, sheared off and fallen on the ground somewhere. So I was driving around with 5 bolts in my drive shaft. So that was a fix that I had to bring. They had the car for about 2 weeks. So I got that back, and it drove like new again. So that happened at about, I want to say right around like the 40,000 mile range. So other than that, I've had no other complaints. Actually, no, I can't say that. There's one more thing that I have to complain about this car, is the stock tires that come on this car, the Goodyear Eagle F1s, they suck. If you get this car and you get the Eagle F1s on them, once those go, get a whole new tire. Don't put the same tire on it, because I've read up on these and I've experienced myself. These tires only will last 20,000 miles, and that's without any burnouts, nothing. That's just driving every day, normal rotation, thumbs down. Tire sucks. It's a very soft tire. It's grippy, but as far as the tread wear, it thumbs down. You're only going to get 20,000 miles, if that, out of that tire. So that's my last complaint about this car. Other than that, it's comfortable, it's wide.